reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. Needless to say, the UN hadn't always lived up to these lofty intentions. Like its ill-fated predecessor, the League of Nations, the organization was only as strong as its most powerful members allowed it to be. Any significant action required consensus among the 5 permanent members of the Security Council: the United States, the Soviet Union, later Russia, the United Kingdom, France, and China, each possessing an absolute veto. In the middle of the Cold War, the chances of reaching any consensus had been slim, which is why the UN had stood idle as Soviet tanks rolled into Hungary, or U.S. planes dropped napalm on the Vietnamese countryside. Even after the Cold War, divisions within the Security Council continued to hamstring the UN's ability to tackle problems. Its member states lacked either the means or the collective will to reconstruct failing states like Somalia, or prevent ethnic slaughter in places like Sri Lanka. Its peacekeeping missions, dependent on voluntary troop contributions from member states, were consistently understaffed and ill-equipped.
Yeah, I'm here.
At times, the General Assembly devolved into a forum for posturing, hypocrisy, and one-sided condemnations of Israel. More than one UN agency became embroiled in corruption scandals, while vicious autocracies, like Khomeini's Iran and Assad's Syria, would maneuver to get seats on the UN Human Rights Council. Within the Republican Party, the UN became a symbol of nefarious one-world globalism.
Yeah, Matt made that.
Progressives bemoaned its impotence in the face of injustice. And yet I remain convinced that for all its shortcomings, the UN served a vital function.
And he never used it.
UN reports and findings could sometimes shame countries into better behavior and strengthen international norms. Because the UN's work in mediation and peacekeeping, ceasefires had been brokered, conflicts had been averted, and lives had been saved. The UN played a role in more than 80 former colonies becoming sovereign nations. Its agencies helped lift tens of millions of people out of poverty, eradicated smallpox, and very nearly wiped out polio and guinea worm. Whenever I walked through the UN complex, my Secret Service detail brushing back the crowds of diplomats and staffers who typically milled along the wide, carpeted corridors for a handshake or a wave, their faces reflecting every shape and hue of the human family. I was reminded that inside were scores of men and women pushed against boulders every day, trying to convince governments to fund vaccination programs and schools for poor children, rallying the world to stop a minority group from being slaughtered, or young women from being trafficked. Men and women who had anchored their lives to the same idea that had anchored my mother. An idea captured in a verse woven into a tapestry that hung in the great domed General Assembly Hall. Human beings are members of a whole, in creation of one essence and soul. Ben informed me that those lines were written by the 13th century Persian poet Sa'adi, one of the most beloved figures in Iranian culture. We found this ironic, given how much of my time at UNGA was devoted to trying to curb Iran's development of nuclear weapons. Apparently, Khomeini and Ahmadinejad didn't share the poet's gentle sensibilities. Since rejecting my offer of bilateral talks, Iran had shown no signs of scaling back its nuclear program. Its negotiators continued to stall and bluster in sessions with P5+1 members, insisting that Iran's centrifuges and enriched uranium stockpiles had entirely civilian purposes. These claims of innocence were spurious, but they provided Russia and China with enough of an excuse to keep blocking the Security Council from considering tougher sanctions against the regime. We continued to press our case, and a pair of new developments helped bring about a shift in Russian attitudes. First, our arms control team, ably headed by non-proliferation expert Gary Seymour, had worked with the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, on a creative new proposal meant to test Iran's true intentions. Under the proposal, Iran would ship its existing stockpile of LEU to Russia, which would process it into HEU. Russia would then transport the HEU to France, where it would be converted into a form of fuel that met Iran's legitimate civilian needs, but had no possible military application. The proposal was a stopgap measure, It left Iran's nuclear architecture in place and wouldn't prevent Iran from enriching more LEU in the future. But depleting its current stockpiles would delay breakout capacity by up to a year, thus buying us time to negotiate a more permanent solution. Just as important, the proposal made Russia a key implementation partner and showed Moscow our willingness to exhaust all reasonable approaches when it came to Iran. During the course of UNGA, Russia signed off on the idea. We even referred to it as the Russia proposal, which meant that when the Iranians ultimately rejected the proposal at a P5+1 meeting held later that year in Geneva, they weren't just thumbing their noses at the Americans. They were snubbing Russia, one of their few remaining defenders. Cracks in the Russia-Iran relationship deepened after I handed Medvedev and Lavrov an intelligence bombshell during a private meeting on the margins of UNGA. We discovered that Iran was on the verge of completing construction of a secret enrichment facility buried deep inside a mountain near the ancient city of Qom. Everything about the facility, its size, configuration, and location on a military installation, indicated Iran's interest in shielding its activities from both detection and attack, features inconsistent with a civilian program. I told Medvedev we were showing him the evidence first, before we made it public, because the time for half measures was over. Without Russian agreement on a forceful international response, the chance for a diplomatic resolution with Iran would likely slip away. Our presentation seemed to rattle the Russians. Rather than try to defend Iran's actions, Medvedev expressed his disappointment with the regime and acknowledged the need for a recalibration of the P5+1's approach. He went even further in public.
You love to see the moon.
Diffuse magic. Mind blood price.
Ranged on square, mirror between moon and cross.
Top scars, I might die off this.
Rotate. 2 for range. Ranged lust.
Shattering pain. Spell reflection.
Ranged on circle, mirror on cross. Make sure to give these seats space. Place them right next to each other, guys. Rotate.
5, 4,
We're getting knocked to star and baiting towards star. This is Ravage bait.
Mind bait. Spirit shell. Move. Sinister reflection. Mind game.
Hard on star, not
ready.
to the left.
Stampeding.
Go.
5, 4,
Rotate.
3, 2, 1.
Shattering pain.
Res me.
Self CD.
Personals here.
Barkskin. Rebirth. Blood price. Barkskin.
Range drop one next to diamond, mirror on triangle.
Barkskin. Time warp.
Give seat space.
I'm gonna die here.
Revival. Rally and
5,
Rotate.
They get dummy out.
Hellstone if you need to.
Barkskin. Abomination.
Get dummy out.
Watch the knock. Can't res right now. Ranged on circle.
Bait.
Get ready to gateway, guys.
5,
Sinister reflection. Move.
2, 1.
Go. Move forward.
Spell reflection.
Give seat space. Lots of space. Rotate.
Iron bark. Tranquility.
5, 4,
Spirit shell.
Remember potions if you haven't.
1.
Mind game. Shattering pain. Icebound. Heal seeker.
Any hellstones if you have it, then you need them.
Barkskin. Diffuse magic. Blood price.
Range seeds, corner of the room. Mirror seeds right on the cross.
Metamorphic. Metamorphic. Barkskin.
5, 4,
Rotate.
2,
Wild
Barrier Heppel.
Barrier. Shattering pain. Spell reflection.
You gonna grip me someday?
Grip.
Thank
Give
you.
the seed space.
that was
Not
these
soaking
ones.
these. Not soaking these.
Sinister reflection. Invoke.
Alright guys. Red zone, red zone.
Pump the boss. Into rabbit, into rabbit, into rabbit. Nice, boys.
Finally! Yes!
Yes, boy.
Good shit, boys.
I'm gonna soulstone.
Absolute god tier games.
Not god tier game.